Welcome back. This time we're talking about Hacksaw Ridge, an incredibly well-made and incredibly gory war movie from director Mel Gibson, the first time he's been behind the camera in a decade. Hacksaw Ridge tells the true story of Desmond Doss, who during World War II became the first conscientious objector to win the Medal of Honor. Now I have to admit, this was a story I was not familiar with going in. I know a decent bit about World War II, but this is one particular story I just had not come across before. And as presented in this film, it is a powerful story of faith, conviction, and bravery. The film tries to tell a good portion of his life story, at least the key moments that led to his convictions that would eventually drive him to volunteer for the Army during World War II, but refuse to ever hold a gun or any other weapon, instead desiring to be an Army medic. These early scenes do work pretty well, and they are even better in retrospect as we see them as the building blocks of his convictions. I wouldn't be surprised, however, if some people went into it and felt the first act was quite slow. It's one of those things where I couldn't really argue with them, but I also wouldn't agree either. What really helps carry it, though, is Andrew Garfield's performance as Desmond Doss. Now, he's an actor that pretty much most people are going to know him from the Amazing Spider-Man movies, which really are not the best showcase of his talent. The first time I remember seeing him was in the British film Never Let Me Go, and I thought he gave a stellar performance there. It was actually the reason why I was looking forward to seeing him as Spider-Man. Hugo Weaving plays his father, and I have to say, I like Hugo Weaving, but for the most part, if you've seen a performance by Hugo Weaving, you've seen pretty much all of his performances. Again, that's not really a knock against him, it's just the characters he's casted in and how he's asked to portray them. This is really the first time that I've seen something really different from him, and I liked it. He was really good in this film as a drunkard, somewhat abusive man, both to his children and his wife. And although he doesn't get a lot of screen time, he does bring a lot to this performance and the movie as a whole. Teresa Palmer plays his love interest, and she's another one that helps bring a lot of life to this opening act that doesn't have a lot of the action that we get later on. And speaking of that action, basically, this movie's kind of broken into three parts. We have his life before the war, his life during boot camp, where he's trying to get the Army to agree to allow him to not touch a gun, and finally, in the war itself, in the Pacific Theater, and this Hacksaw Ridge battle. During the second act, at boot camp, is where we meet most of the rest of our cast, including Sam Worthington as Doss's captain, as well as Vince Vaugn as his sergeant. And I have to say, Vince Vaugn is not an actor that I think about when I think of a full-on war drama. But it's a casting decision that ultimately really worked for me. He plays the drill sergeant character, so there's a lot of comic relief in his first introduction as he's taking down all of these new recruits, putting them in their place, insulting them, and really just having a fun time. It's actually the most comedic section of the movie. But even when we get beyond that, when we get to the more dramatic moments as Doss is fighting for his rights and then later in the battle itself, Vaugn really delivers a performance I haven't seen from him before. You know, Mel Gibson has been in Hollywood prison for quite a while, ever since his well-documented, bout with craziness. But we forget that he's a really good director. He can orchestrate some phenomenal action sequences, and he gets some really good performances from his actors. And we can see this on screen throughout this movie. Now, you cannot talk about Hacksaw Ridge without talking about the violence, because it is absolutely brutal. I mean, really, the only other movie I could compare this to as far as the brutality of the violence would be Saving Private Ryan. And of course, with Gibson's history, as well as his previous movies, which have all been very violent, whether it was Braveheart, Passion of the Christ, Apocalypto. I mean, he's known for very, very brutally violent movies. But while it could come off as just gratuitous violence, I did not take that out of this movie. I fortunately have never been in a war situation. I don't know what it's like. I don't want to know what it's like. But I have to imagine it's something like what we see in this movie. This is not a movie where people get to have heroic speeches and then die with one last breath. This is someone walking through the mud, we hear a bang, we see a spurt of blood, and someone's dead. And it makes the actions of Desmond Doss that much more heroic, because we just see the brutality that's around him and what he was facing and what he did to save so many lives. This is a story that I'm very glad was told, and I think Mel Gibson does it justice. This was a powerful war movie, both from a visual presentation standpoint as well as the story that's being told. As long as you can stomach the violence, and like as I've said multiple times, it is incredibly gruesome. I think this is a movie that's well worth watching. Now, if you've seen Hacksaw Ridge, what did you think about it? As always, you can subscribe to my channel, check out some other reviews, and until next time, I'll see you at the movies.